Awesome, cool. Okay, so we have Hamel here today. He's joining us. He used to work at GitHub. He was actually working on a project that was a precursor to the GitHub Copilot, which is super cool. So involved in LLMs back then, and now after he left GitHub, he's still working in the LLM space as a consultant. The way I noticed Hamel, I think, well, I already know about your work since years ago. But like you've been doing a really cool work in open source in general, and some of the things that spiked my interest over the past period was definitely axolotl, because both of us were struggling there a bit, and then you had some PR that turned out to be there was a synchronicity because I was stuck with the same problem, and then the tokenizer gotcha blog you wrote was super cool as well. Work on the LLM, like in particular those inference platforms, if I can call them that way, like that you're kind of very, very broad across the field. But like LLM is definitely the leitmotif. So yeah, without further ado, I think we can kick it off. I wanted to just maybe start a bit with your journey. How did you get to GitHub, and just hear a bit more about those behind the Hamel story, I guess.
Hey guys, I want to give a huge shout out to Hyperstack folks who have generously sponsored my compute over the past month or so. Basically, I got 16 H100s, which is 2 8 GPU nodes, and the performance has been amazing. Basically 2x the speed up compared to my A100 nodes. So I want to quickly show you how you can get started yourself. It takes basically 3 steps only. You go to the environments here, you create a new environment, you give it a name, you pick between Canada and Norway. That's the first step. The second step, you go to SSH keys here, you create a new pair, you pick environment you just created, you give it a name, you paste your public SSH key. That's it. And finally, go to virtual machines, deploy new machine, give it a name again, select environment. Let's select Canada here because they have more compute there. Then you select the hardware you want, like for example H100s. You select the images, you select the SSH key you just created, and hit deploy. That's it. Literally a couple of minutes to get started. It was really easy for me to just basically create these 2 nodes I just mentioned and get started running LLM trainings. So the documentation is super cool. I could actually solve all of my problems just by looking at their docs. They additionally have a Slack channel where they were super helpful, so I can't recommend them enough, honestly. The thing they kind of focus on is basically, because a lot of these GPU providers focus on big enterprises, so oftentimes you can't get on-demand H100s, whereas NextGen focuses particularly on that. You can get top-of-the-line hardware on demand, even if you're an individual or like a smaller team or whatnot. They also focus on bigger companies, but that's kind of their edge here. So without further ado, guys, let's go back to the talk. I do suggest you check them out, and let's continue.
Yeah. So, okay, like prior to GitHub, I was doing machine learning for like already like 10, 15 years, so I was quite old already at that point. And like before that, I was working at Airbnb. And just as like a practical matter, my wife, we had to move. My wife had got a job at a different city. I was living in San Francisco. And so I was enjoying Airbnb. And I was looking for like remote companies that like kind of, support remote work. And yeah, I found GitHub, like it was a completely remote company. I was like, oh, this is cool. I use this tool every day. It seems like a really cool place to like do ML. They didn't have like much ML or any ML really at the time. They're just like thinking about it. They just hired a few people at that moment. So I thought, okay, like this is pretty cool. I mean, I really like the tool and certainly have interesting data. And then like after a year or so being there, so I started working on machine learning infrastructure because again, like they didn't have anything at GitHub, but they had a lot of other kinds of infrastructure and certainly lots of talented engineers. And then like somewhere into that, I got, language models kind of became a thing. I started doing a lot of open source work at GitHub. I convinced them to let me do open source work in ML. And so like I ran into Jeremy Howard doing that, and Jeremy had this like ULM fit paper. So I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. Like, let me try to apply that on code, like language models on code, like transfer learning, taking pre-trained models and doing that. And we had like a giant corpus of code on GitHub. And so the application that I worked on was semantic search of code. So it's basically like, parallel corpus of comments, like code comments and code, and learning a joint representation over that and using that for search. I didn't have the success of making that into a product. Like there's no semantic search of code in GitHub right now. But that led to a lot of excitement around language models and code, and sort of gave us a lot of muscle around like how to do those things. And then one thing led to another, and then the more ambitious project of GitHub Copilot came about. So that was like really cool. It just kind of like exponentially took off from like ULM fit. I didn't even know what that the state of the art would like advance so much as it did. And so yeah, it was like a really exciting time. Yeah, and so yeah, it was a really exciting time. GitHub was really cool because like in addition to large language model stuff, I also did a lot of open source work as well. And so yeah, it was cool.
Quick question there. It was like wanting to have your work be visible externally. Was that a big component to why you wanted to also work on open source? Because like I know I was frustrated, especially when I was at Microsoft, like because, well, actually both DeepMind and Microsoft, because none of your work actually gets to be seen externally. Well, at least at DeepMind, you maybe end up on some paper, and that's how you kind of go to the external world. But I know that's a big motivation for some people. What was it for you as well?
Yeah, for me, it was more like sometimes big companies can be too slow for me. Like I like to ship stuff. It can get very frustrating. And I was looking for an excuse somehow to like somehow ship things and work on interesting projects with people, but like somehow do that at work. And so so one excuse I came up with was, at that time, like GitHub just came out with GitHub Actions. Like GitHub Actions wasn't always part of GitHub. Like this is like came out in, I don't know, 2019 or something. And then I said, okay, like I'm gonna go into interesting ML projects and like switch them over to GitHub Actions. Kind of like a janitor type job. It's not like the greatest thing to be doing, but I was like, okay, let me like, I don't know, it's something. Like let me do it. And actually, it was like pretty cool because like to set up CI/CD for like a project, you have to really understand everything that's happening. Because like you have to understand you have to understand the entire code base in the limit. And so I started doing that on certain projects, and I wasn't really like that enthused about GitHub Actions, but it was like an excuse that allowed GitHub to pay me to do open source. So I just like use that as the wedge to sort of, and then I was able to like kind of sort of, yeah, that's like it gave me the feeling of shipping things faster, like to work on open source projects and make progress there. It gave me that, like it fed that hunger inside, I suppose.
Super cool. And stepping back for a second, like what did you study before even Airbnb happened and GitHub? And you said like you've been in the industry for 15 to 20 years. How did you start?
Yeah, I studied math and industrial engineering in my undergraduate studies. I had a quarter life crisis at some point, and I actually went to law school, which I don't use, and I don't practice law or do anything like that. But we could talk about that later. Actually, it came back recently for an interesting reason. And then I did like a master's in CS. Like later on, and I did a master's in CS because I felt like I did that while I was at Airbnb. I felt like I had to wash my hands of this like law degree more thoroughly, so I'd like just like launder it through, just like get rid of, like kind of push it down, and like have it be less confused. At that time, I feel like at that time it was more important. It felt more important to have a credential like that. I don't know if it's as important now, to be honest. I could be just saying that because it like doesn't matter anymore for me personally, but yeah, like I don't know if I would have necessarily done it again per se. It's definitely a big time suck.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. especially if you're a high agency, if you have that self-discipline, you can do a lot more going your route, especially if you kind of focused on the right things, I guess. Being in the right subfield of AI helps. And I wanted to make a comment there that I don't know if you knew this, but like Geoffrey Hinton, actually, he has a very interesting lineage. Obviously, he's, I think, a grandson of George Boole or something. And then he had a period where he was first studying mathematics, I think, and then he left to be a carpenter for some period of time before getting back into machine learning. Imagine the world if Geoffrey stayed in the carpenter business.
That's really interesting. It's like a lot of programmers I talk to, they're like, they want to like just leave and do woodworking, or they do woodworking. It's a similar vibe, you know. Like
I think that's that urge, that visceral need to do something physical. Yeah, I think I definitely had that when I was studying electrical engineering. Like everything is so abstract, and not for the good reasons, by the way. Like, but I don't want to digress too much in there. But like, I feel we should be much more project motivated when we're teaching students algorithms and those stuffs, as opposed to having a black console pop up with like array of 10 numbers and then wow, the number, like we got them sorted. Like that's not like the most enthusiastic thing like a lot of people can do. So anyhow. Yeah, I think we can kick off maybe with the presentation on your side, and then, as I said, we have a ton of questions on your work, and
sure,
you can maybe share the slides.
So I don't have too much in the way of slides. We can just freestyle it.
Sounds good.
Let me just share my screen a second here. Okay, hold on. Is it sharing?
Okay. Not yet. Yeah, no, we can see it. By the way, guys, feel free to post questions. I'm gonna curate them as usually, and also raise hands, and then we can ask him questions.
So we already went through some of this. This is me, Hamel Husain. That's my name. I have a website here. We can visit this together on the screen share later. About me, okay, like I've been doing machine learning for 25+ years. Really long time. I've worked at tech companies like GitHub, Airbnb, DataRobot. I've either created or have been a core contributor to open source projects, many open source projects used by thousands of developers, mostly in like the machine learning infrastructure and tools space, and like data science tools even. Kind of more recently, I have been focused on large language models, which we already discussed. And actually, like now I'm an independent consultant. And I can talk about that. Like, it's kind of interesting that I'm a consultant because, so like this 25 years, like I like started out in consulting, and then I like hated consulting, and I thought I need to get out of it and never do it again. But like that was like a very different consulting. It was like at large consulting companies. Right now, just like on my own, it's like totally different, and it's not like I viewed some like a lot of stuff that goes on at big consulting companies as kind of useless, to be honest. And we can talk about that. But yeah, independent consulting is like totally different. Like I have to sort of find people that need help, and like, yeah, I have to like make sure that I'm providing value all the time. I can't hide behind any company, which is kind of cool. So the consulting I do is like, it's focused on large language models. I actually do consulting with like tools as well. So like, what I mean by that are like vendors, like Replicate is one of my clients, for example. And then like industry, like people trying to implement LLMs. It's like I work with companies, and then I still work on like open source stuff like Axolotl, because actually like the tools or the vendors like need help, and a lot of times I have to pull the open source into the vendors. So I have to like kind of work on the whole software supply chain. Like I have to work on like some open source, I have to work with vendors, and I have to work with industry to kind of like do the whole life cycle of software to get like LLM stuff integrated properly. So I have some interesting clients. Like one of them is ReChat, which is cool. they allow me to talk about them publicly, so that's why I mentioned them. And then Answer AI is actually another one of my interesting clients. This is Jeremy Howard's company. And so yeah, I was like skeptical about consulting skeptical about consulting in general. I was like, consulting, I don't want to be one of these like grifter consultant people who like just come and like have like PowerPoint decks and then like don't really do anything and like leave. Kind of like it's kind of the stereotype of consulting. But actually, like for large language models is great. So like first of all, I don't do like, I do a lot of hands-on stuff and write code, but also like large language models stuff is like changing so fast that it's actually like hard to it's like a nice place to be to like get a like an overview of the space, to like to kind of like choose. Yeah, it's like shifting so fast, like it's hard for me anyways personally to like pick one specific thing. Yeah, and then like while I'm doing consulting, I evaluate tons of tools and frameworks, because all the people that I consult with, they're like constantly thinking about buying tools like for LLMs, and this is like for everything. This is like for LLM serving, LLM monitoring, fine tuning, you name it. It's like, always evaluating these tools and frameworks. So that's like the interesting part about consulting.
Quick question on my side is, how many projects do you run in parallel?
Only run like 2 in parallel, 2 or 3. That's it, max. Mm-hmm. So it's actually not that much, to be honest. But I can't really do more than that in parallel because, it doesn't make sense like for one person.
And time-wise, like, are those projects like 3 months, 2 weeks, or like how do you like negotiate the timeline, the scope for the project?
Yeah, the scope keeps like changing. A lot of times it starts with like some like really deep focus work, and then after things stabilize, it like turns into like advisory. So like those 2 or 3 parallel things, like those are like deep sort of projects. And then there's like some like long tail of it, like advisory, where I might just check in, once a week for like 2 or 3 hours. But or even less than that. It's not always 2 or 3 hours once a week. Sometimes it's, we go several weeks. But yeah, I mean, it's like I kind of intuitively go about it, depending on what people need. And I actually am like really selective. Like I don't work with everybody. I get lots of incoming sort of inbound questions, and I try to be really careful and thoughtful about what I work on and not like just say yes to everything that pays a lot of money, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that kind of helps me like sort of focus. And the way I choose is I try to get a sense for like how serious people are about like building with LLMs, and like get a sense for like how much investment they've already made. Because it's like it's really, what I found is it's like hard to go by what people say. You have to look at what they're doing. So basically like what have they tried so far? How much are they building with LLMs? And I'm trying to work with companies that are really serious about making products with LLMs. So yeah, that filters things out quite a bit.
Super cool. Do you have any hard criteria, or is it mostly by this point of time you just can see those things and see who is shipping and see who is serious? Like, can you verbalize some of those criteria you're looking at?
Yeah, so it's mainly like, it's pretty intuitive, but it's, hey, like show me what you've built already, where you stuck, what you've tried to do to overcome like being stuck. What have you thought about? And they usually, people walk me through, and I can tell like how invested someone is in building with large language models. And I think like my intrinsic, so that's like one component. Another component is okay, so my intrinsic motivation is being like sharing knowledge, and I think there isn't too much information out there yet about how to make LLM products, like in an applied setting. Like, how, what are the different things you have to think about? What are the different, like, what's like kind of the playbook? I don't know if there is a playbook, but there's not, like, is in the plural sense playbooks. Like, there isn't that many examples, and so one of my motivations is like, can I share that? And so another one is like, hey, are people open? Like, how open are they to sharing? And like, is there a good chance I can take one of these projects and then and like create something for everybody, like to share that? Because I think that's exciting, because there's not really too much information there. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. And ties nicely to your GitHub open source work and all that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the high level. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, I evaluate lots of tools and frameworks. And yeah, so that's consulting. I have like some other slides. I don't know if you want to get into these other slides. These are just like some unsolicited advice about large language models that kind of I feel like people miss, and we can talk about it if you want, but we can also stop and like go in a different direction.
Yeah, we definitely have more questions here as well. Like there was one question from Sriram here in the chat asking what are the main kinds of problems you're seeing small companies face? And that was something I wanted to ask you as well. Just did you observe some patterns in general?
Yeah. Okay. So there's one thing. Okay. So let me share my slides again. This is like actually a really good question for like kind of some slides. So what I was going to say is one common, like the most common problem is like people not looking at their data. Like, a lot of people start with like prototyping with OpenAI or whatever, and they like build some system and they kind of keep vibe checking it, but they don't really have a good handle on, like, yeah, they're not really looking at their data, so they don't really know. And so like one like interesting, like somewhat surprising thing, but maybe it's not, it shouldn't be surprising, I guess, is like when someone asks me for help, I just spend like 2 or 3 days looking at data. And what it specifically is like, first I like make sure they're logging their traces. So like, what is a trace? A trace is just like, it's not nothing new to, it's not like a new concept. So traces is just like, it's been around in software engineering for a really long time. It's like basically sequence of events that are correlated. That's like an idea of a trace. And like traces are used like a lot of times in web applications, like for session data, for example, or like for Kubernetes, if you have like lots of different applications talking to each other, and you have a trace that kind of like groups things together in some like semantic way. So like traces for LLMs is just like conversations, like a conversation thread. You can think of it, simplify it in that sense. It's not just conversation, but it's like the whole series of interactions or series of things that occur when you invocate a large language model. So it can be like calls to a large language model, it can be RAG, function calling, all that stuff, different kinds of chaining that you might have, like branching, whatever happens, like all that stuff is like your traces. And so it's really important to log, first of all, log your traces, but then also to look at them. Whenever I look at traces, I always find like tons of failure modes that people don't know about, like that the companies don't know about. Like, hey, like I noticed, did you know like these like 10 things are always happening? It's kind of funny that you need like, okay, theoretically you don't need a consultant for this. Like it's just looking at data, but for some reason, this has always been the problem in machine learning, by the way. Like people don't look at their data. Even in machine learning, people are not looking at their data. So it's like, I don't know, it's just like some kind of human laziness is like not looking at your data, but it's the same thing applies here. Like you have to look at your data. So I'm just gonna beat that to beat that.
Which is crazy. Which is crazy because like architectures are so boring. The data is the code, right? Like ultimately, if you're not looking at the data, you're not looking at the code. It's literally the right analogy here. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. And also just like so many fixes I find in my solutions when I'm analyzing the failure cases and just going through the data before kicking off a run. It can also be quite expensive. You just have garbage data. You could have fixed it easily. You don't do that due diligence, and you just proceed to the next stage of the pipeline with a shitty data set, and like just you lose money ultimately. So agree.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And you actually need to log your traces if you want to do fine tuning, because like if you're just not logging your traces, then you're just throwing away very valuable data that you can use down the road for fine tuning. And so like a lot of people are not even logging their traces. It's like very surprising, but it's true. And so like looking at your data is so important. Like it's so important that like it's actually worth it. So like some of these tools, they have like data viewers. Like this is so this is like a screenshot here. I don't know if you can see it from Langsmith. You don't have to see the details. But basically it's a trace. Like you see like there's a system prompt, there's a human. The human is like what question they put in. There's a function call. There's a the function call has a results, and then there's like some output. That's an example of a trace. Like, okay, so that's Langsmith. I love the LangChain people, but Langsmith is actually like, okay, there's so many different tracing tools out there. Let's not pick on Langsmith, but just as a general sense, I find it to be really difficult to look at lots of data really fast in Langsmith, especially like in a domain specific way. Like, because if you're looking at a trace, you want to be able to not only page through traces really fast, but also you want to like have the context of like, there might be some other context around this. Like, what am I looking at? I might want links to like other screens. Like, okay, if I want to find this trace in like a database or something like that, or something else, and you sometimes you need like more information to review a trace. So like one dumb thing is another dumb. I'm gonna just talk about dumb things. Like, so I'm gonna make LLMs like really uncool by the time this talk is over. But like is to build like a stupid web application, just like use like Gradio or whatever.
Streamlit. I do that same thing. Yeah, that's it. Just like 5 minutes and you have a web app.
Yeah, this Streamlit, Gradio, doesn't matter. Who cares? Takes like less than a day. Okay, this is one that I built. But basically, like keep it super simple, but remove all friction from looking at your data. So important. Like it's the most important thing. Like make it to where looking at data, like you don't feel any apprehension in your mind. Like there's like, oh my God, I have to look at data. So I'm gonna have to click all these buttons. It's gonna be slow. No, then you need to build something. And so this specific thing, like this is very domain specific, right? It's like, yeah. So basically, like you can think of it as Streamlit. Like I needed certain kinds of filters. I needed to edit the LLM output because I wanted to curate some data for fine tuning. So sometimes I needed to like get rid of things I didn't want in the output manually. This is like very specific to this problem. So it could change in like different problems. You know, and I'm just like curating data. So this is like one example. For some reason, like people get hung up on this kind of stuff and they go shopping. Like they go like, oh, like I can't look at my data. And then they start shopping for tools. And it's actually, if people spend like weeks and months shopping for tools that help them look at data, it's pretty insane. I don't know if that's a good idea. They can be okay for like, okay, like if you're training foundation models, there's like some good tools. There's some tools out there that like, it's like data viewing tools and filtering and stuff like that that have like good stuff. But for domain specific stuff, like for your problem, just build a web app. Like that is gonna be much better. So that's like looking at your data carefully and evaluating. Oh yeah, and then another thing is, so a lot of people don't. Okay, so again, like another very uncool thing, like probably really uncool, is like write lots of unit tests. So like if you're doing this, so like okay, unit tests, what does that mean? It means like dumb failure modes that you can write assertions. It's like, you know, like okay, so this is like real code. This is some of real code. I mean, this is just some screenshots, but you see here, there's like some assertions. This is JavaScript, but this is like our TypeScript. This is a like invalid placeholder, like email contains like a word it's not supposed to. Some details are being repeated. These are like domain specific failure modes that you can write assertions against. And some people are like, oh, I don't have dumb failure modes. Like, I don't know what those are. If you don't know, if you don't have any idea of what your dumb failure modes are, or you think you might not have any, that means you're not doing this. That means you're not, there's like, it's impossible that you don't have dumb failure modes almost. Like, I've never seen that in my life. And so basically like, that's like the first step is like, you need these assertions. We need to write them in a way that it's not just like in the unit test. So like, you need to write these assertions such that you can use them in unit tests, but also you can use them to filter data. Like, because like you don't want dumb, if you know that it's failing one of these assertions, you don't need to show it on this screen, for example. You already know it failed and whatever, and you can like analyze that. And you know, that can be part of your curation pipeline. You can also use it for testing, but you can also use it in your LLM orchestration framework, like LangChain. You can put these assertions there for self-healing. There's like all kinds of things you can do with them. So you have to like be careful. You have to like, that's a little bit more advanced topic. We can talk about that later. But like do the dumb stuff. So like the theme of this is like do the dumb stuff first. Like log your data, look at it, write tests.
This is software engineering 101, and like me coming from an electrical engineering background and starting as a software engineer at Microsoft, for me this is like, I always think this is something everybody's doing, and then I realize if you actually go ML as your first like thing you're studying, they don't pick up some of these very, very basic like 101 software engineering tips here. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I have a more in-depth presentation about this whole topic. I didn't want to rehash it here because, you know, we might want to talk about something different, but I go in-depth into all this with like more examples and whatever, which I can give you a link to and you can put in the notes of this show. But yeah, absolutely. Like for some reason, people forget about this. I don't know what it is. It's like people want to jump straight to complexity. They're like, oh, I have LLM. Let me use an Oracle model to like judge. They're like, let me just buy a tool, like some evaluation framework that's very generic, and then that uses like an Oracle model to like judge my LLM outputs. And or let me use a framework off the shelf that calculates a whole bunch of scores for my LLM, like conciseness. Does it mention competitor? You know, all these generic tests that you may not care about, honestly. Like you have to think about like your failure modes and like what you care about, and like because it doesn't make sense. So like I see this all the time. Yeah, and so yeah, it's absolutely right. Think like software engineering kind of mindset is really useful, to be honest. Okay, so these are some common. This is maybe more closely answers the question about mistakes. So
wait, just quickly, while we are still at the topic of data, I was wondering, is there, because I asked you for the criteria, how you pick companies that are exciting to work with. And then is there a tension here between, okay, you have to do this work, which means that company didn't know how to look into their data, which kind of discredits them in a way. How do you find that balance between, okay, these guys are not even looking at their data versus they are a super exciting company I want to work with?
Yeah, so it's like, that's a really good question. So like nobody's looking at their data. If I were to say like, I only work at people look at the data, basically like, that's like, I just stop consulting right now. It's like, how hard are you trying? Like, maybe you looked at some data, you know, you're not looking at systematically, but you're like, have a way of debugging. Some people like have unit tests. They might not have been writing their unit tests in the right way, but they're like, hey, I don't know what else to do. I'm writing unit test. Like I'm some sign of like actually investing in AI because they like genuinely want to make it work, not that they're just like poking around. Does that make sense? Not that they just want to like write a blog post about ML. They like actually need to make a product of ML work. Like that's what I'm looking for. Because there are people that just want to write a blog post about how they use AI and just be done with it. Like they're gonna say that to you. And this is the same thing for jobs too, by the way. It's not about consulting. It's like the same thing. So there's something
they would say there is machine learning a job and then there is not, or what are you trying to say there?
Yeah, so like okay, so this is a very tricky subject, but okay, like if you're working with LLMs, ML or AI or LLMs even, just like let's focus on LLMs. You kind of have to like do a little bit due diligence, like if you're getting a job, to think to like smell like I think like, does this company really need to build a product with LLMs? Like how motivated are they, or do they just want to write a blog post saying that they're using AI for X? And you can tell by the way someone talks and what actions they've taken so far, like of like which one of those two it is. Does that make sense? Like, because there's certainly a lot of people that just want to write a blog post so they can like raise money or they can, do something like that.
Makes sense.
It's an age-old problem. It's like it's not really specific to LLMs. It's probably more acute now, but this thing has been there for a while. So you just have to smell. You just have to like navigate that. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
100%. Okay. So okay, like common mistakes. One, not looking at your data. I underline this because basically, I would say even people that are looking at your data, they're looking at the data and not really looking at it. It's counterintuitive, right? That you have to look at your data. It's like, oh, like I'm a fancy AI engineer. I have all this. I'm making all this money, and also I'm like have all this education, and I know all these fancy tools, and like basically, like whatever. And like what I'm gonna sit down and look at data like a monkey. Yes, like you should do that. It's counterintuitive. And it's actually so like that's why it's underlined. Another thing that I see is like data not matching production. So like this is more for fine tuning. So like people okay, so like in the process of fine tuning, what you end up doing is like you fine tune a lot of your prompts away. It's like because prompts, they don't change from LLM invocation to invocation. And if you have like complex set of prompts, you end up fine tuning that away. And then like what people don't realize is like the data used for fine tuning has to match your production traffic exactly, or should match your production traffic exactly. So if you are changing prompts, or if you're like introducing new function calls, new schemas, whatever, you have to redo or kind of rehydrate your fine tuning data. And like that is a really big challenge. Like people struggle with that. People struggle with no systematic way of measuring their large language models. There's like a lot of vibe checks going on, but there's not too many like, there's a lot of people struggle with systematically measuring things. And systematically measuring things is like, to just give you an idea, is like you have all these unit tests. You also have human evaluation, which is kind of, you can have tools for that, like the ones I showed earlier. But you can also, once you do human evaluation, you can do model evaluation, like model-based evaluation too. You also have to track the correlation between the human evaluation and the model evaluation, so you have an idea. There's many different stages of like systematic tests you can do, and people really struggle with how to do that. Another mistake is like buying too many tools. So there's a fair amount of process involved with large language models. Like I didn't really talk about tools too much. If you notice, I talk more about things you should do. But people love to buy tools. It's just like, I don't know, some kind of human bias, maybe something about being in technology. It's like you don't want to think about processes. You want to just buy a tool that automates that process, or I don't know. You like so, but basically, like people buy too many tools and they just get stuck in complexity. Um, Another thing is like people fine tuning too early is a very common mistake. For some reason, like people get in their heads like they need to fine tune like right away, but you can't really fine tune unless like it's not a good idea to do that unless you have like systematic measurements and tests, and you have like a good way of looking at your data and curating data. And same thing, prompt engineering without measurement and tests. The same thing about fine tuning too early.
One question, Hamel. Yeah. You mentioned measuring stuff. There was a related question in the chat. Are there any useful approaches or tools from the observability stack?
Yeah. So like, so right now, there are some like vendors that do observability stuff in different ways. I don't have a favorite one yet. What I have been doing is use the infrastructure that people already have for logging traces. Just because I don't want to start introducing, there's already too much like complexity already. So like okay. You know, like if a person is using, for example, honeycomb, I'll log the LLM trace of the honeycomb. Or if the person is using LangChain, I'll use LangSmith. I'll use whatever like is the most adjacent tool to what that person is already using. You know, all like basically like traces are essentially like, and you can also I've also logged traces to like Postgres, and you know, you don't really need to like a trace logging tool is fine. There's also like there's so many vendors out there. Also, like there's one called Honeyhive. They help with observability. I mean, I don't want to like recommend any vendors. I would say like use whatever is the least incurs the least amount of technical debt. And technical debt is not just like from building something yourself. It's just like even like onboarding a vendor can create technical debt. So, you know, try to use what you have. Does that help?
Makes sense. Thanks. That also means kind of that there is no really strong differentiation among those tools, because the main criteria is basically reducing the need to change your existing infra, I guess, and that type of technical debt. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, like it can be. I mean, it's very early, so that's why. I mean, I suspect that at some point there will be good tools that make sense to buy that I will like. It's just like so early that I end up having to always like it always devolves in me using that tool as a database. Does that make sense? I always end up extracting the data out of this tools and putting it in something else. And so that's why, because of that, that's why I don't have like a really concrete recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah, and so like that's like basically common mistakes. There's also like, okay, this one is really common, over scoping the AI. So like, okay, when like a really common thing that people want to do, okay, I'll pick on one of my clients actually. It's like one of my favorite ones. I already talked about them. So this is like a real estate CRM. And basically like this is for real estate agents. Like you can, you know, do all these things like manage your contacts, do marketing. You can search for listings and do tours and manage your various like transactions. Okay. So there's all these menus and things. You can see all these things to click on, right? Like all these little menus, and it's basically like any SaaS app. Like a lot of SaaS app has this idea of like, hey, there's like we have all these menus, we have this like software, traditional software. Let's put a chat bot on top of all of it, so that you don't have to, you know, click on anything. You can just talk to the chat app and have it do everything. Generally speaking, I think it's a very bad idea in most cases. I actually haven't seen like, so okay, the reason this is a bad idea, this is like a very, this is something that people, this is the first thing people think about when they think about OpenAI. A lot of people, they're like, oh, let me just, I have some software already, let me just put a chat bot in front of all of it. The problem is like, it's really it's a bad place to usually start because it's very overscoped. You're basically trying to have AGI in your product, and it's like so much surface area. Like you basically in the limit. I mean, you're having it do. You want it to reason about everything and anything that you can do, and if your product is non-trivial, it can be quite a lot. And actually, like it can be really hard to, if your product is constantly changing. Also, with a lot of startups, they are, it's actually, it can be hard to fine tune because once you start fine tuning models, they become like specialized. They at least like in the easier way of fine tuning them, tend to become more specialized. Um, and so like with all this surface area, you have to figure out, you have to maintain like pretty complex systems to like gather data for like new functionality that you want to have, that you use for fine tuning. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just like a tremendous surface area. And basically, like it's sort of fine tuning and prompt engineering live in direct tension with each other. Like like I said, you want to like fine tuning is to like specialize the model, and you want almost always want to fine tune your prompts away. It's prompts that stay the same. However, like if your product is always changing, you kind of in the limit, it becomes like you want like an AGI. And so it's just like a really common trap. What's more interesting is if you have thoughtful integrations of AI into your product. Like instead of a chatbot in front of everything, you have like some AI in very specific features. So like, if there's if I have a search feature of some kind, let's say I'm looking at a listing, can I have AI in this view? Like start scoped. That is much easier to iterate on, and actually a lot of times like results in better products than just put a chatbot on everything. So that's like, anyways, that's like
Agreed.
So yeah, that's the end of these slides, by the way.
Luca had a very related question to this. So Luca, maybe you can ask, or I can also ask him.
Yeah. Thank you, Hamel, for an option to ask you. So you're talking a lot about like not investing too much into unnecessary tools and stuff and building stuff yourself. But do you have like a recommendation if we need to build a RAG or LLM powered app on a medium-sized project? So it's not just a small demo and it's not like on OpenAI scale. Do you have a preferred stack now that you would suggest people start using it? Like, would it be LangChain, Llama Index, something that's already, that's already used in the community, or would you say like start from scratch and then see how it goes from there?
But the context is you don't currently have an info, right? You're starting literally from scratch and have the optionality to pick whatever you want as the best tools. Okay.
Yeah, I really like Llama Index for RAG. I think it's really clean. I really like it. For RAG, it's actually pretty helpful to have a stack. You don't want to build like you don't want to build it yourself. Like you don't want to build like a vector database yourself. Obviously, you don't want to. I mean, it's just a lot. So when I mean like don't, it's like a balancing. Like think critically, like whether you need the tool or not. I didn't mean to say like don't buy any tools. The reason I say don't buy any tools is to just bias people like really hard, because it's hard in these presentations to like have a balanced thing and say like sometimes buy tools. You're not gonna. I have to like really go hard at people and say don't buy tools, because there's just like too much bias into buying tools. So if I can just push people away, it like is helpful. But but yeah, like Llama Index is good. LangChain is fine too. It's pretty good. Like the people that work on LangChain, they're actually really great. Like if you like, they will help you like very aggressively, and it's like surprising. Like yeah, like if you start using their product and, especially if you start buying one of their products, like the clients that I have that use LangChain, they get like basically like white glove support and like an insane level. So I mean, there's different things to think about, but just sharing.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense.
That's super cool. Passion, customer obsession, as Jeff Bezos would say it. Super cool. I think we're almost at the time. I had one more question. You can choose not to reply if you don't want to, but I was curious, relatively speaking, compared to your previous your previous jobs at GitHub and Airbnb, how is consulting paying? How are you happy and how do you negotiate these types of prices for the project scope that you guys agree in front, I guess?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I wish people talked about this compensation and pay a lot more openly. So my goal is to for me to feel like it's working. I would say I want to it would be nice to have earn just as much or more than like a FANG job, So what does that mean? Like, okay, by FANG job, I mean, in the Silicon Valley Bay Area, like maybe for like a staff or principal engineer, like can I do better than that? And so am I there yet? No, I'm getting close. It's like, I just got started. And so it's possible that I could exceed it. But I'm not sure. Like I would say that right now I'm like very close to kind of that level. But it is like a lot more like stress in a way. So there's like pros and cons. Like one is like, okay, I have to think about like where I might get work from, so on and so forth. However, the process of getting work and keep in all that stuff is actually really exciting. I like the idea that if I'm not providing any value, I'll just be fired immediately, or not fired, but it was like, quite like politely just told like, okay, it's time to go. I think that's like really, it's very like pure in a way. Like, there's no company to hide behind. There's nothing to hide behind. It's just me in the wilderness, so to speak. And then okay, you asked about how to set rates with clients and pricing.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, it's just like it's like a hyperparameter search. So, I have like a rate in my mind, and I try to increase that rate, and then until like I hit no, and then maybe hit no for a while, and then increase it again. Like do like some like messy kind of hyperparameter search. That
are there any numbers you can rely on, like compare like some folks who do similar types of jobs as you do, like that you can use to find the fair market price, whatever that means? Obviously, it's very custom.
That's a good question. So I have so the cool thing is like when you start doing consulting, I found some other people doing consulting like me. So like there's a guy, Jason Liu, who does Instructor, you might know about. There's another guy, Dan Becker. There's another guy, JD. He's like data science consulting. He's like a YouTuber. And like we all share rates. One thing that I noticed though, everyone like doesn't. So one thing is people are like, as at least technical people, like software engineers, we're very shy in like doing this hyperparameter search, and we're not good at negotiating. So what I found is in my peers, like I've always found myself just telling people to charge more. But then there's other people that charge a lot more than me as well. Yeah, I do. This is very useful to like compare to find like, what people, within reason. Like there's people that charge like 10 times the amount that I charge. and they're at different levels.
Are they 10x engineers, man?
They're like famous people. Yeah,
Are they 10x
they're like
engineers
famous
or just like 10x greedy? Nice. Well, do you charge, like, do you bill per hour, or like, do you actually just, okay, there's a project, you understand the scope, and then you give them like a custom amount there? One more question there.
Yeah, I do by hour. I'm like also doing hyperparameter research over this. Like, another consultant told me, like, doing by hour, actually you lose money. I started to experience this actually, like, because certain things, like, I just know really well. Like, someone asked me a question about like TRT LLM, I'm getting this like bug, can you like fix it? And it'll take me like 15 minutes to fix it. I'm like, okay, I just lost like so much money because I did so much work. Like, I already, like, you know, I don't know, like, because I did so much work to like have that knowledge, that one esoteric thing, that like, okay, like, if I just build by time, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's like, might as well just not even build them, honestly. Like, I just, like, I don't even know if I should build them right now.
And ultimately it doesn't scale, which is the main argument against people going in, companies going to consultancy, as opposed to having a product and then having that massive reach and scale that you cannot get by sharing your hours, building your hours.
So like, I've started doing flat fee stuff, especially for advice based stuff. So like, a lot of people, they just want to know, like, okay, these things that I showed on the slides, like, hey, don't do this, do this. Like, they want me to like constantly coach them. I just do flat fees for that. They just started working out better because people like are more, they're just like more likely to ask for advice when they don't have like an hourly, like, it's going to cost me every time. It's like the same thing almost. So they're still paying, but it's like, you just pay up front. And there's a book called Hourly Billing is Nuts or something like that. It's actually a pretty cool book. You can read it in like 10 minutes. It's actually made by a consultant. And it's pretty convincing that you shouldn't do hourly rates. If you can, you should do like flat. So it's something I'm still learning, to be honest. Like, I don't have the answer. I also don't know if I want to do it forever. Like, I'm very much like, I don't have a master plan or grand plan or something like that. I'll just take like 1 week at a time or something. So if there's like an interesting job or something that makes sense to me, then yeah, I might switch to that. I don't know. Nothing has like really no opportunity like that has come up that resonates with me yet. But
come on, you were at OpenAI, man. Just say yes. Just say yes.
Yeah, OpenAI is really cool. OpenAI is like actually really cool. Like, they have a lot of things going for them. Number one, a lot of smart people working there. Second, really interesting problems, and like, they also pay a lot of money. So like, in all dimensions, it's like pretty tempting. Yeah,
I had some first-hand insights there. It's very interesting compensation plan, especially after ChatGPT came out. I think with that we can wrap it up. This was super cool.